Welcome to Playing with Fire, the podcast for people who are ready to custom build their love.
We're talking about non-monogamy, however you design it, as an individuation opportunity.
Want to leave the default and make your life spectacularly you? You're in the right place. Ken, I've had a request from several people recently to talk about conscious uncoupling. How would you feel about that topic?
I would like to be involved in that conversation. Yeah.
When I think about conscious uncoupling, I think about my own first, really major uncoupling. And I can't say that it was done with a lot of consciousness. How about you?
Same. Yeah, definitely. And so I'd be happy to provide some more sophistication than I used in mine.
Well, and one of the things that we have done in our current partnership is we have some uncoupling procedures written into our plans, which, let's be clear, I think that's about as useful as a birth plan. I've given birth many times. I liked having birth plans, but they have nothing to do with the actual experience you're going to have. For me, a birth plan was about getting myself into an attitude where I understood what I wanted without getting too fixated on the exact way that this was going to play out, because it's just going to happen. And I think the same thing is true in our partnership. Is I like the idea that we have some clarity about how we would like to exit if we decide to de-escalate or end different aspects of our relating. But I also know that if we get to that spot where we're de-escalating, something will have happened.
Right. Something will have happened there. And that's why it's so tricky to have these plans, because you plan from the context of your
Getting
relationship
along.
in one spot of getting along, and you're going to be in another context that you can't imagine yet.
Right.
You can imagine in the abstract, but not in detail. So then you get there, and it's helpful to have a written record of your original intentions and your attitude. But
Yeah, so like all other agreements, I like to have some basic written understanding of where I'm coming from now. Not so much where you're coming from, but where I'm coming from. What is my intention in this relationship? And that doesn't mean that I won't get to change my mind. It doesn't mean I have to follow it, mechanically, but I find that comforting. Now, that said, this idea of conscious uncoupling came from Catherine Woodward Thomas. She wrote a book, and I believe it was picked up by Gwyneth and Goop. So,
okay.
it went the way of Goop, which I'm not a big fan of, yada, yada, whatever. But the idea of conscious uncoupling, just the phrase, I really do appreciate the idea that we can do anything with increased consciousness. We can do anything in our life. We can have, conscious death processes, conscious birth processes. We can have conscious rites of passage, like where we enter into this. We can do a lot of our life with an increased awareness of what's going on for us, like how it's impacting us and how we're impacting others.
So how does the adjective conscious, what does that say to you in this context?
For me, it's about the difference between being defensive and reactive and being in a state of reimagining, in a state of oh, I'm going to be curious about what my life can look like and what your life can look like when we no longer relate the way that we do now.
And for me, it's also, it's about being aware of the scripts that I might be following, so that I can decide whether that's actually a script that suits me, that matches my values, matches how I want to show up.
I really appreciate that, because that's one of the things that I loved about watching. So I was friends with you when you were married the first time. And I remember watching you, and I was younger than you. So I got to sort of watch you doing your marriage. And I remember really appreciating and not understanding how easily you seemed to just set down scripts that didn't work for you. You seemed really confident in not having to do what everybody else was doing. Would you say that that's because you were living consciously, or what was creating that for you?
Well, I tend to think of that when I think about my past selves. They had a tendency toward um, not iconoclasty. That's too cool. I wasn't that cool, but I very much wanted to be doing my own thing. So I did run a lot of the things that I did through my consciousness to say and ask the question, does what everybody expects me to do work for me? So yeah, I never thought of it this way, but there was a consistent element of consciousness
And
in
so
my choices.
I think that's fantastic. And knowing what I know about how that particular marriage ended, I would say it's like you lost that thread somewhere. So you
That's
you you
a
maintained it in some areas, but
mhm.
then you lost it because when you divorced, it seemed like you struggled to maintain the consciousness, the conscious awareness of, hey, I get to decide how I do this. Not entirely, but it did seem like I definitely did. But I mean, yeah, I totally did. When I divorced, I completely I had no idea what I was doing and I was flailing all over the place.
I think that's a fair characterization. The you know we So I had this idea of how I approach the world, and that is in times of relative stability.
Mm,
And then the stability went out the window, and I found myself. This is revisionist, or this is me theorizing through my memories, but um, I found myself without the bandwidth to apply that consciousness as much,
yeah.
or if not without, at least choosing not to.
So I
So,
was working with a couple recently who they came in to working with me really set on the idea that they would stay together, kind of in the same. There's a similarity between what you were describing and this couple. They had created their own path every step of the way. They'd
mhm.
always done unusual things. They'd lived overseas when they were very young together. They were not following traditional career paths. They'd come by their children in unconventional ways, legal and ethical ways, but unconventional. And so they had this image of themselves as people who do not follow the status quo. And they thought they were going to stay together, but it turned out they got to a particular point in the work where it became very, very obvious that they no longer fit. They just like they something had changed, and something had changed really strongly for one of them in particular. They really wanted a particular relationship structure, and to live that relationship structure out now, they were not willing to wait, and it just didn't fit into the vision that the other person had for their life. And they were a wonderful example for me of what happens if you live that value. And I would say it is. There's an iconoclastic sense of like, I don't have to follow the rules. I get to be myself. They dropped two of the big elements of those the defensive and icky stuff. It was the defensiveness. Neither one of them got trapped in defensiveness around their split. Um, and they also didn't decide what the outcome of the uncoupling had to be. They didn't decide, okay, we have to get divorced and set up our lives separately. They took a really long time to reimagine what they could do. So there was this long wander through a time where they didn't really know exactly how to describe their relationship or what it was or whether it was a relationship anymore. But they were very willing to stay in this in between liminal state and not rush it.
Well, I applaud that, and I think about my own experience, and there was a lot of it required a lot of distress tolerance. There was a lot of discomfort, um, and
You mean to go through the breakup?
to go through the breakup, going through the breakup, going through the all the various untanglings that had to happen along
Yeah.
the way. There was a lot of distress tolerance needed, and what I'm picturing when you describe them in this period of wandering is They chose to use their distress tolerance in a different way because that's kind of uncomfortable. What are you doing? I don't know. And that brings its own issues, its own
Right.
discomfort.
They were staying in the I don't know. They were resisting, they were also resisting other people trying to pick sides, or
Ooh.
because that, if
Hmm.
they had allowed that, if they'd bought into that story, then immediately now there's an us, a you against me, combative perspective, and they resisted that elegantly. Um, and it's something that I think is different for every couple, everyone who is in a long-term relationship, but their total rejection of the idea that they couldn't stay friends, not just friendly, but friends over the long term, and their rejection of the idea that there wasn't a you versus me, it meant that they actually had to stay in a willingness to be critical of their friends and their family
Hmm.
when their friends and family tried to automatically like
Right.
resort to this um, adversarial positioning, and that took effort. I watched them week after week, like just staying with the yes and mentality of where no, I'm not going to allow this to devolve just because we don't want the same things anymore.
Uh, so that's a particular set of skills to make that happen. That's going to
Right.
require some thought.
Well, one of the things that they had going for them, is that in their original, they were married, and they'd had a ceremony, and what in their original vows, and I'm sharing this with permission, they talked about a lot in there. There were all kinds of values things. They talked about the values that they had for their relationship, and it was beautiful. But one of the things that stood out to me, and they both relied on it as they were talking through their process, was that they had always held that forever wasn't how they were going to measure success.
Oh, okay.
And you and I have something similar
Hmm.
in the vows that we made to each other, um, that that we're standing by each other's side as long as we want to, and as long as it makes sense for both of our growth paths. And that in itself is, it's foundational. I feel it gives us some place to go when it doesn't, when forever isn't the only measure of success, then changing, reimagining, ending no longer is a failure. And that I think is a key to the entire notion of conscious uncoupling, is
I think it
staying
is. Yeah,
out of the idea that you're
removing.
failed.
Yep,
Yeah.
removing the stigma. That stigma,
Yeah.
and that's so yeah. Reframing that goal is stepping away from the modern script.
Yeah. So I think that it's worth mentioning that uncoupling, you mentioned when we were getting started for this episode, you were talking about all of the little transitions that we go through
Hmm.
in a relationship where we're not uncoupling, but we might make some fundamental change to the agreements that we're keeping or to how we interact with each other. And I think that those are important too. And those can definitely be talked about as a reimagining, but an uncoupling there is this very, there's a certain tone to it. And I think it has to do with the relationship escalator, right? The relationship escalator, we get on it and the relationship's going, it's got a trajectory. And so if we're ever on the relationship escalator, then like uncoupling is part of the stepping off. And I think this is where you did something interesting, because you got divorced as part of a process of trying to figure out how to have a more egalitarian triad. Like,
That
so I
yeah.
think you were in a way that was incredibly consciousness raising step to say this doesn't work anymore, because now there are three people in this relationship, and this piece of paper is stopping us from having an egalitarian situation, which is what we were going for. But it meant that you were officially stepping off the relationship escalator, and the relationship escalator is, well, it's a little dangerous to get off, And I don't know whether you've ever seen, but like those stairs are going,
Yeah.
they're going right in a groove. They'll chew you right up.
You got to do it just right.
You got to do it just right.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's surprising that you have feelings now about how you did it, unconsciously or poorly. But I remember seeing you trying really hard to do it with thoughtfulness and with intentionality. And those are key ingredients from my perspective when people are trying to do their uncoupling in a way that will leave everybody better than when they started.
So we're so the couple that you were talking about, what sorts of things did they reimagine? You
Well,
know what?
that's a great phrase. One of the things that they did was use the word reimagining first. They didn't know whether they were going to get divorced. They were married. They didn't know whether they'd get divorced. They didn't know whether they would live separately. They didn't know what the plan was. So they started off with a reimagining process. And there were some ingredients. We talked about this at the beginning of their process because they needed to give some space. They needed to create a liminal space, the space between spaces, where they didn't have to know what exactly they were doing. So they needed time. They needed to allot some time, and also not to cling too hard to the idea that, okay, we're going to stay in this liminal space for exactly this amount of time, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. I don't think there's an amount of time, but they had to create some time and some time to spend actually doing the reimagining, like having the conversations, and even more importantly for each of them, doing the introspection to start getting clear on what is it that I want for myself. It was an incredibly powerful exercise to watch them make time to know themselves individually and then come back together, and from there do their reimagining the relationship process.
I I applaud that a lot, and I can see how that sounds like a very creative process, and creative processes often don't lend themselves to fixed timelines. So I can see why I'd be like, well, okay, we're going to do this in 6 weeks. We're going to have it all done. But it's such a creative process of reimagining, introspection, like you said, learning about each other and themselves, and then imagining what they're going to do with it. That's,
Yeah.
um,
So a lot of people have asked for that. Like they want to get it done in less than a month or less than
mm,
90 days. And when people have approached me for that, I've said, are you willing to devote full-time work to this? Because if you're not, if this can't be your full-time job, I no. I really don't think we could use the phrase consciousness or reimagining unless you have tens of hours to spend devoted to this. And that makes sense. I mean, you don't you code for a living, like you make systems. You don't make a new system in a few hours, right?
correct.
It takes a long
Not a good
time.
one,
And if
but
especially if you
no,
need
not
to
even.
to take apart an existing system and build a new
Oh,
one.
that's a lot more time. Yeah.
Exactly. It is easier and faster for me to help people create clarity of a new relationship that's
Yeah.
just coming together. Absolutely takes less time because we're not also unpacking and realizing like, oh, there are feelings, there are apologies that
Yeah.
need to happen, there are imago dialogues, there are elements that need to happen in order to create a sense of yes, we have acknowledged and done the work of what came before, so we can now honor that and move forward with something new.
hmm I appreciate you referring to time as an ingredient in this, because it makes me think of bread, where I first heard that term. Where, yeah, time is an ingredient. You can put all the stuff together, but if you don't wait, if you don't let it do its thing, you're not going to have bread. Go
Yeah,
ahead and bake it, but I don't know what that's going to be.
it's
Um,
not
if
it's
you're
not going to be
really
tasty
lucky, a
sourdough.
cracker, but it's not going to be a good sourdough loaf.
Yeah, I think that's in Kenneth Fork's book, right?
Like forkish.
Forkish, fork.
Yeah.
I don't remember,
Yeah.
but I do. I think that the ingredients that go into a reimagining are they can be simple. So I would say time is a big one. Another one is willingness to grieve. Willingness to grieve what came before, what the hurts that happened. And when I say grieve, I mean active grieving. I mean mourning.
Yeah.
I mean allowing yourself to do the active work of, wow, has this is what has happened. This is what we have gone through. This is what I experienced. And that's not just grieving together, but grieving individually. Because in order to imagine a future, I'm going to have to grieve
Yeah. I
what hurts came before.
I agree with that 100% because I didn't do that and I suffered for it. A lot of people suffered for it because without that grieving, without that letting go, um, even though you were saying, hey, you applied consciousness and you worked on it, and I did, but I also in the process of working on it dragged all this stuff I hadn't grieved into the future with me, and it didn't really
Yes.
fit. All that stuff needed to be let go, but not just like dropped. I needed for my own self to acknowledge it, and how it felt for me, and to remember it so that I could let it live where it lives and not in the future I was trying to create.
Right. And that, what you just said is so important. Grieving isn't just about letting go. Letting go is a piece of that, but there is an active reckoning that needs to happen. And to my mind, a symbolic action. We need
Yes.
we need ritual. We need symbolic action.
So the symbolic action is I mean, I didn't have any kind of action associated with grieving in that major uncoupling, and as a result, I have had to do it over in bits over many years afterward. So the thing is, if you don't apply the time at the outset to do these things, they will pop back up, and you can choose not to deal with them, but they will cause troubles for you, even if just for you.
Right. And usually they will have an impact, a greater impact on our future
Hmm.
relationships. And
Yep.
certainly each of our major uncouplings had an impact on this
Yes.
partnership and other partnerships that we have had
Oh yeah.
since. So there's another ingredient that we've already mentioned that just bears listing here. It's an actual concerted effort to get aware of self, aware of yourself as an individual, aware of your needs, your wants, your bottom lines, your boundaries, getting clear on that stuff, which this is, by the way, the same stuff we talk about when we say, hey, let's do differentiation work so
Mhm.
that you're prepared to potentially open your relationship. I cannot make agreements. I can't make new agreements if I don't know what my needs, wants, bottom lines, and boundaries are. And I can't actually set boundaries and bottom lines unless I know what my needs and wants are. So it's the same work, but wow, it's just so important that, and it takes effort and it takes a fortitude
Yes.
to
Yes, it
face
does.
what I
Hmm.
actually want, right? To deal with fawning tendencies, to deal with my desire to be liked, my desire to be needed. It takes immense fortitude.
It takes a lot of fortitude, and in the context of reimagining the future, um, well, I think it it makes sense to me that if I don't know a lot about myself, then the things that I imagine up have a low likelihood of actually working for me. The more I know about myself, the better what I imagine will line up with those wants and needs that I actually have in there.
Right, because it's also going to be experimental.
Oh,
So
yes. Yeah,
when
it's
we're
not going to
doing
be a one and done.
right, when we're doing a reimagining, when we're consciously uncoupling, that's not going to work anymore. Well, that was exciting. So we lost we lost power, and so we're picking up. We're picking up from where we left off. We were talking about, Ken, how the effort of reimagining a relationship, it's an iterative process.
Yeah,
We
right.
can't we can't be fooled. It's so easy to be fooled into the idea that we can do the hard work of getting clear on our needs and wants and renegotiate and like check, done,
Yeah, yeah. It
got
doesn't.
it.
We grow, we change. We need to recheck all those things
Over and over again, we're
over and over.
going to have to negotiate and also allow space for our changing selves to exist. But when people are facing a conscious uncoupling, there may in fact be an end of the road where we're not going to be renegotiating. So I find that sometimes I get nervous and I want to stay in the reimagining phase forever because
Hmm.
that lets me stay in the space of, well, this relationship can be new, it can be different, and it doesn't have to end. It doesn't have to end. But I want to make space too for the fact that a relationship can come to closure.
Yep.
Some of them in different ways. We have co-parents who really we only overlap around our kids because that's just how we have decided to collectively work with those relationships. And an ending can be the best move for everyone.
Yeah, it can an ending can make space for what's next
Yeah.
for each individual.
But we have to get comfortable. So the example that I was giving, the a couple that I was working with who did do a reimagining, they did like they eventually did do what they considered to be a full conscious uncoupling. Their relationship as it was ended. And almost every single element that had previously made up their relationship, sharing a home, the way that they overlapped in all of their responsibilities, their finances, the things that they talked about, whether they talked about connecting with other people, all of those things came to an end. And I would say that the biggest challenge that we faced while doing the process was that they were they were great friends. They really liked each other.
Hmm.
And they really no longer wanted to be each other's anchor partners. They didn't want to be in that situation. And so they had to decide to get to a certain point where it was okay enough to just say, we're done. We're done with this. And so for them, deciding on some legal um, choices was the turning point, and that was there was deep self awareness work that had to happen there too, where they had to come to terms with the idea that neither one of them had ever imagined a divorce could be in
Hmm.
their future. And I know I had never like I got married at 20, and when I walked out of my home for the last time, I remember thinking like, but I'm not a divorcing person.
Hmm.
There was a major identity shift to go through to say, wow, beyond whether I want to be married to this person, am I willing to contemplate being a person who gets a divorce, being a person who ends this relationship? And a lot of us were taught to not respect the choice to divorce.
Right. So that kind of bridges the ingredient we were talking about, which is self awareness, and the next one, which is grace for yourself and your partner when things get
Yeah.
confusing and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience to you in that I hadn't like no divorce. It's not like I was walking around with divorce in my back pocket, like, oh well, if this ever doesn't, if it gets hard or whatever, then I can always get a divorce. I wasn't thinking like that. So all of a sudden to be faced with the prospect was confusing. And it required, like you said, an identity shift because it was part of my identity, apparently, that I wasn't even totally aware of. And then so having grace for myself, not beating myself up for or like trying to help myself run away from the discomfort of these changes allows for a less tight grip on what was, which can be really block what comes next, and for my partner as well.
Right.
Oh, this is probably really hard for you, and so
Right.
how
And at
can
the
we help
same
each
time,
other
we have to balance not over
and
functioning.
not over functioning?
And when I say
Mm,
overfunction, I want to get clear. I mean, not stepping in and doing your partner's emotional work for them. You can't process their feelings about an uncoupling
right.
for them. As much as you may have tried to process their feelings for them while you were together, it wasn't working then, by the way, but and you've probably come to realize that, and that's probably part of the uncoupling process. But as we uncouple, the experience of calling all the pieces of myself back to my center and saying, "Ooh, I'm going to show grace and confidence and trust that my partner is a whole human
Mhm.
who can do their own work, who can show up and do what they need to get through this change, this transformation." That makes space for each of us to build new habits and to let go of that pattern of over functioning in different areas for each
Yeah.
other. I I think the word grace is helpful there because grace is it's sufficiently general to
Yeah.
just leave space for, oh, maybe I'm going to have to take a breath. Maybe I'm going to have to slow down my response times. Maybe we need to communicate about certain issues in a different pattern than we used to. So that I've had people come in and do that work privately with me, but also maybe we just need to switch to having our uncoupling conversations in writing. Maybe I've
Mhm.
witnessed when many of my friends as well as my clients start sending each other thoughtful emails where they outline what they've gotten to in their thought process so that they can give each other time to process in a less reactive way, and give each other time to have feelings about it
Yeah.
without jumping to conclusion about anything. Creating space for grace is a big deal if you're going to consciously uncouple. There are some principles that we could talk about too. So we talked about ingredients:
Yep.
time, willingness to grieve what was, getting self-aware, showing each other grace. But there's a core principle that I know I missed. I know I missed it, and it's because I we got into a spot that was so damaging for both of us that it didn't feel possible. But the core principle that I hear people using and doing well with is, can we leave each other better than we found
Oh,
each other?
I love that principle. Definitely did not engage in that principle in my uncoupling either.
Yeah. And so I have had quite a lot of endings and breakups and uncouplings in the years since. And I think one of the reasons none of them stands out to me as these, like, I don't tell stories about them as much because they were relatively simple. We did work to leave each other generally better than we'd found each other, or it was just a natural ending to a season. But that effort that it takes to leave each other better off, that can play out poorly for someone who has been like the relationship administrator, like the person who has handled all the
Yeah.
relationships may feel like they need to now take care of all the things. Also, if you are if you are ending a relationship with someone who doesn't want to end a relationship with you,
Yeah.
this may not be available.
Right.
And so
I
you may
was,
have to make peace with the fact that your partner, who is now becoming your ex partner, does not have that for you.
yeah. I
That's not
mean,
their intention.
when you were talking about grace, you mentioned the not over functioning and allowing your partner to be your soon ex partner to be a whole person who handles their own stuff. I definitely, in my first relationship, I wasn't down with that. Like that, I didn't want that. Like if someone had said, "Okay, you're an adult. I'm going to let you handle all this, and I'm going to handle all my stuff," I would have been like, "Wait, this is not what. No, this is
Well,
not
I
part of
think
this."
you would have said, your outside voice
Oh
probably would
no,
have said,
okay, yeah,
of
no.
course, that's logical. But your inside
Inside voice
voices
would have
would
been
have
like,
been
"No, nope,
freaking
nope, nope,
out.
nope."
Yeah.
Yeah. So on the other hand, it is also preparation for pretty soon they're not going to be there to do it. So it doesn't really matter whether I start now or later. It's going to have to happen at some point.
And so timing adds
Mhm.
into all of this too. So the story we opened with, um, that couple took a long time. Their process was 2.5 years long. I In retrospect, I believe that they may have been able to complete that process in about 9 months. There was a lot of processing that needed to happen, but they spent a long time trying not to be done. And they
Hmm.
were both doing it, right? So they're both holding on to a version of a future that would work for them, and those versions were not compatible. Now, luckily, they were able to still be gentle with each other. And because they were able to be gentle enough with each other, not perfectly gentle, there were fights, there were arguments, and there was even some gnarly stuff. There was times when they fell into the traps of, blame and poking each other's soft spots, because we know where those are.
Right.
But in general, the tone was gentle enough that they could keep coming back to the table and trying to reinvent together. And the downside was that they stayed in that reimagining process a long time and al- almost missed the opportunity to let go.
Hmm.
They'd
Well,
gotten to a spot where they were like comfortably, okay, we can just stay in this reimagining forever. And that could have been their choice.
yep. I mean,
It's your
that's a way
choice.
you could go.
But now it's been a couple years since I worked with them, and I I look at where they have gotten to now, and I'm not working directly with either of them. I'm not like up in their stuff, but I see them. I speak with them infrequently, and they're good. They're
Hmm.
good. This was a good choice for each of them. But they had to let go and offer enough space to shift away from old patterns and to start becoming who they wanted to be outside of that container.
So I
Um,
heard you mention gentleness as a way to, as one of the factors that allowed them to continue this process in a non-damaging way for each other.
right, but gentleness to a point that also
Yeah.
led them. I mean, at one point there was they were doing well with their reimagining, and they were being so gentle that I knew behind the scenes that each of them had a great big, yeah, I'm done. And they weren't willing to say it. They'd each individually gotten to a spot with, yeah, I'm ready to let go. And the gentleness was their a priori commitment. So they weren't saying this thing.
Mm,
Um, it's a really difficult spot to be. So I think, as with all things, the dosage is what matters, and
right.
gentleness itself could be overdone, because
That
the,
makes
e-
sense.
each of them conceived of calling it quits as not gentle.
So, yeah, I think I get that. It's like not nice.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the
And
difference between kind and nice?
yeah.
And to
And
me, kindness
as,
can be, it can feel harsh, but
yeah.
nice
Yep.
could be quite cruel
Yes, it
and look
can.
pretty and feel pretty on the outside.
I was thinking about about another one of the principles, which is shifting away from punishment. I was thinking, so gentleness. Yeah, like there are bounds to gentleness beyond which it's actually a problem, and you just described that. But it is also in opposition to a punishment standpoint where I'm going to, like, well, it's a very different thing to say, I would like to end this relationship because I want to hurt you versus I want to leave this relationship because I don't think it's working for either of us anymore and I want something else. Those are two very different things, but the action can be more or less the same, but how you present it kind of
And
links the gentleness to the concept of punishment.
yeah, I'm reminded of the conversation we had with David Cooley
Hmm.
several episodes back, talking about the adversarial
Yeah.
mindset, and
Right.
how, at least in North American culture, we are taught we are taught to take an adversarial approach, right? Our everything teaches us to see things as having sides and teaches us a punitive
Yeah.
mode. And so it takes effort to stay out of that. And that brings in the idea of, a lot of us will need support while we go through this process. Can your support person or persons actually help you stay out of that adversarial mindset or are they going to actually create it?
Mm.
And I think it's interesting. So I went through an uncoupling using a sort of uh, obviously adversarial method. We each had a lawyer. Our lawyers were there to get us each, quote unquote, what we were due, and it was messy and unpleasant. And I don't think anybody involved enjoyed that process. And in particular, the attorneys were they were encouraging us to see each other as adversaries.
Yep.
You used a mediator. And on the outside, I remember witnessing that and seeing how, okay, that looks good. That looks like a good choice. But I didn't experience the conversations. Like we were all talking, the three of us were all talking all the time back then. And it still sounded like there was quite an adversarial conversation happening.
And I can't tell whether that was something that we brought into the room with the mediator. I mean, that may have been the mediator managing our adversarial standpoints and, trying to mitigate them as much as possible. I think the mediator actually helped quite a bit,
Right.
but in a situation where these two people are angry at each other for the ways things haven't worked, sometimes rightfully, like, you did this thing and that's a problem, and sometimes I'm projecting my stuff onto my partner
Right.
and saying, this didn't go well, I didn't do these things right, and you should have stopped me, and all of these things that cause a rift. And we were angry, and we went to a place where that anger was being deflected some, absorbed by the mediator, not magnified. And that changed post mediator when we
When you didn't
completed
have that
that.
support.
Not only did we not have that support, but other factors came into play. There were other players in the conversation beyond me and my partner who were adding adversarial elements to it. So it started to ramp back up after that, and it was very clear that there were conversations happening outside, beyond the
Amongst your
conversations
larger
I had with
community.
them amongst the larger community, that were shifting away from where we had gotten to from the mediator. So all of that's to say, you're totally right. If you don't want to engage in an adversarial mindset in your decoupling, be very mindful of the conversations you're having with people beyond your
Right.
partner.
I thought it was funny. It's funny in hindsight that when the when the attorneys that my ex and I were using hit a certain spot where clearly the adversarial was no longer, it was not functioning, it wasn't working, they actually each said, we can't do this. There's nowhere to move. And we had to go, they insisted that we hire a separate attorney who functioned as a mediator.
Because they
A
didn't know
mediator
how to handle
because
you if you weren't being adversarial.
they didn't. And so we
Hmm.
actually went and we sat. I remember very distinctly sitting in this room and in about 75 minutes hashing out all the stuff that couldn't be hashed out for months, before. So many conversations, all done, 75 minutes. So
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting because it was I think it was because there was the difference between this one person who was like, okay, we're going to have to come to some decisions and we're not going to engage in arguments about who's right.
Yeah.
We're just going to come to decisions. And I'm not saying that's the right path for everyone. It's not about that. It's that it was so obvious that the adversarial model didn't even know what to do when it
Yeah.
hit a full roadblock.
And that kind of makes sense to me. I mean, we're talking about legal relationships at this point. These are legal marriage issues, and there are other things that have legal ramifications. I mean, people can
Ownership
be
of
partners and
property
have
and
businesses or whatever.
businesses and children.
And the United States legal system is explicitly and intentionally an adversarial system. So that is a very difficult system to work with if you're trying not to be adversarial, because it's like, it's built that way. It's supposed to be.
Right.
which is not
So
great for this situation.
for this situation, when we're
Yeah,
talking about wanting a conscious uncoupling.
right.
And so we're going to have to get more creative in
Mhm.
our solutions. And I didn't know to do that.
Nope, me
It
neither.
was it was a disaster. Well, I mean, you did. You had watched my my divorce and did choose differently.
I
So when you
did
say you
try to
didn't,
learn
I don't know.
from what I saw.
I thought you did. Um,
Well, I guess what I mean is I learned from your experience. Like up until that point, I never thought about it. And I learned
sure.
from watching you that the legal system is adversarial. And then I read a little bit about it and it's like, oh, yeah, that's how it was built. So, okay.
So, and we're still going to have to go through it
Yep.
if you are involved in a marriage, property ownership, raising children together, owning businesses
Businesses.
together,
Yep.
and I was doing all of those things with that person. So yeah, the legal ramifications couldn't be avoided, even if we had chosen another route. We still had to actually cross through those hurdles. But the thing that stood out to me the most, the thing that was the least helpful to me was actually not the adversarial nature. That was crappy. I didn't like it. It didn't work. But the thing that boggled me was that there was no ritual shift. There was
Yes.
no
Hmm.
acknowledgement that this was an ending of something that had existed. And, when you get married, there are some rituals, but this particular cultural zeitgeist I find myself in is not rich with rituals unless I create them. There was no ritual, and that left me bereft.
Hmm.
I felt more loss over that and more invisible. Like I felt like I just disappeared. Like, okay, you're just standing in a courtroom, you sign a paper, it's done, and then it's it's done. And there's just like two words and it's done and
Yeah.
there's nothing. So the other thing that I have watched clients do, I've done myself since, is creating a ritual.
Yeah.
And that ritual can happen alone. It can happen with the partner that you're uncoupling from. It depends on what the situation calls for. You could be witnessed by friends, but creating a ritual, and we have other episodes where we talk about creating rituals, but I think it is a huge disservice to skip out on some type of ceremonial. Oh, I am honoring. I see what was. I see what we created, and it is ending. And the same is true if we're reimagining, like allowing
Yep.
yourself to step through that liminal space, over that threshold into the new version of life is profound, and it deserves acknowledgement.
It does. And I was thinking about the ingredient of grief. And one of the things that open ended grief can go on for the whole rest of your life. And it can be very impactful on how your relationships in your life goes. And a ritual can be a good way of closing that grief loop.
Yeah,
Doesn't mean that you won't grieve in the future about this thing. It doesn't mean you won't be sad. It doesn't mean you won't have feelings, but it allows it allows me to feel a sense of completion and continuance. And I don't know, let me know if you disagree with this, but when I picture this ritual and this liminal, this threshold that you're describing, this hallway of walking from one part of life to another, um, it's happening, but the ritual allows us to put it somewhere where we can really like hold on to it. There's physical, it's sensory experiences, and for me, it kind of feels like closing the door on that threshold. Because one of the things I've had problems with grief is, well, maybe I can go back, maybe I can walk back and fix the thing or make it different. And the ritual is that very weighty moment of saying, no, this is actually done and there's no going back. So
right.
I kind of visualize it as closing the door on that threshold. It doesn't mean that you can't build something else in the future, but you're never going to go back
I
into what
appreciate
was.
that image. I really do. And I think that, the phrase that comes to mind is ambiguous grief.
Oh, yes.
The
Yep.
grief that happens when we don't really know, but so death comes with, there's a finality. Um, there is that we understand that there's a finality, and that if I'm going to interact with the dead person, I am interacting either from a spiritual sense, that I hold myself, or in an imaginal sense, or with their memory. But when we're talking about the ambiguous grief of an ending, and that I see the person, they're right there.
Yeah.
They're right
Right.
there. And that could also be the ambiguous grief that comes with letting go of someone who is no longer healthy for you to be around,
Mhm.
and you would love for them to be, but they just aren't.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, ambiguous grief is, I think, the hardest type. There's a book out there. It's called Soul Broken. I will link it in the notes. I don't remember the author's name off the top of my head, but that book talks quite extensively about ambiguous grief, and I think it's a helpful place to start
That's great.
working through.
And so
Um,
rituals, very, very helpful for that. But
right. So there are a couple other things that we should touch on before
yeah,
we wrap up.
let's do that.
One is, a lot of times a conscious uncoupling happens because we struggled to make we couldn't figure out how to make agreements that worked for us.
Hmm.
Either we wanted things that were just mutually exclusive or incompatible, or we just actually couldn't agree on making agreements. Um, but a lot of us will have to keep making agreements with people who we are uncoupling from,
Right.
especially if we have children
That's
together.
right.
So if you have the opportunity, and the person's not always available for this, but if you have an opportunity to work with someone who is collaborating with you, I would encourage making an agreement about how you make agreements in the future, a meta agreement, if you will. If you can get to that spot where you talk about, okay, do we make agreements by joint mutual decision? Do we make agreements individually? And if so, do we have to consult each other?
Hmm.
How are we handling that? And again, not everybody is going to be willing to do this, but understanding what it is to shift from, wow, we struggled with agreements before, but now it's probably going to get harder because our life paths are going to diverge. Our needs, our connections to other people, the way that we're influenced by other people are going to change how we think about agreements. You may not be able to do this, but if you can have a conversation about how we will try to make agreements going forward, it can at the very least, what I have seen is sometimes what we find out is, oh, this is going to be really hard. I'm going to have to come to terms with the fact that my process going forward is probably going to be a lot about letting go and realizing that
Hmm.
I have no control over this person, and that I have no control over what they do. And I don't actually get to decide what they do, or how they raise these children, or how they involve themselves in their own life with their own. Nope, I don't get to decide. And that
Yep.
is, it is a bitter pill to swallow, because a
Yeah.
lot of us can't imagine it from inside this partnership. But the most peace I ever found was when I finally got to the spot where I realized, oh, I don't get a say. This person gets to enact their life the way they want to, and I'm going to have feelings about that, and those feelings are mine to deal with.
Yeah.
And
And
it
that brings us
is,
back to the grace. Give yourself the grace of, yes, you're going to have feelings about that, most likely. And they can be very, very, like, not just strong, powerful feelings.
yeah,
And yeah, have them, experience them, process them, but don't let them like run you. So give yourself
yeah.
the grace of experiencing them.
And the last piece, the last sort of principle of conscious endings that comes up for me is, most of us want a sense of closure. We want to feel how, like you said, that proverbial door is
Yeah.
closed, and we've gotten what we needed. Um, but most of the time, there's a lot of unfinished business. There's stuff that wasn't handled, wasn't managed, wasn't said. And the place where I see people get stuck most frequently is desperately wanting an apology, and ideally accountability as well, for
Yeah.
their role in the dissolution of this relationship, in the change of this relationship. And I'm going to be really frank, we're usually not going to get it. We
That's
just
right.
aren't. There will be rare cases. The the story I was talking about before, we walked through a whole ton of apology and accountability ladders. We walked through a lot of imago dialogues, working through the feelings that had come up, not trying to build a new future so much as like, oh, can I acknowledge that you went through that? But most of the time, what I see is there's a moment where we have to close the door and accept that the apology is not coming, and that I could cost myself a lifetime of peace if I hold in my heart that I am owed that apology, that I am owed their accountability, and that this is just wrong. And this is where justice just overwhelms this desire for justice within a relationship. But it just doesn't have to be provided.
Right.
And this is where we have to really come to terms with our wants not always being met. Our ability to get this from another person is not always, nope, and they don't actually owe it to us. They might owe it to us on a spiritual level, on a community level, but they also owe something to themselves. And I don't know what it is, what's stopping them. Is it because they haven't done their work? Is it because they disagree with the situation? Is it because they honestly are not able, like they don't have it within them to grapple with what we're asking for? But the thing that feels most freeing to me is to offer myself the self-care move of continual practice at letting go. I don't,
Yeah.
I get to ask for this, but if I keep asking for it, demanding it, and recreating the story that I am owed this, or this is what's fair. Well, I know from experience that you can keep doing that and it will keep hurting.
And it will keep hurting. My experience for myself in the more unpleasant times of my uncoupling was the need for an apology, the need for accountability, this quote need that I had for this particular element of relationship to be manifested in my partner. But it's actually I was trying to hook back into when we had agreed that we were going to treat each other this way, that we were going to engage with each other at this level. But that was ending. And by trying to, by asking for this, by like persistently, but, but say you're sorry, or say you did this was, and like, and say this was wrong, or whatever I was looking for. Every time I did that, I'm trying to bang back through that door that's closed. It's on the other side of that door. That was an old relationship where, and the thing is, even then, it would be a conversation about, so why not? Why isn't there an apology here? And we could have that conversation. But with the change to a new relationship, that wasn't a conversation that's part of the new relationship. So it didn't exist. And that caused so much psychological dissonance in me of trying to hold the old relationship right there with the new relationship. And it, like you said, there's no peace in that, in that combination.
Yeah.
And I had to let go of the old one and say, oh, yup. So these things happened. I feel some things about it. And the only way to get closure is to go back in time to a different relationship and work with it there. It's not
And
available here.
I watched you just recently go through a little blip of that, a moment of wanting to say the thing that you want. Like but I want to say the thing. This is annoying and this is frustrating. And I watched you, and I had I remember thinking, oh, you're caught in that trap.
Yep.
You're caught in the little finger trap of, oh, I need this. And so you're pulling harder and harder and you can't get it. And then I watched you step forward and step out of it and say, okay, I'm not going to try to get something. I'm not going to try to get something from someone who does not owe me anything.
Yep. Right.
They don't. They just don't. We get to end relationships, and
I have
That's how
this
that
Yep,
goes.
I have this mental picture of the 2 cans on a string. I don't even know if people know what that is anymore, but you used to be able to connect 2 empty cans to a string,
I think that technology still works.
and it definitely still works, and then you can talk to each other and listen through the can. I can talk, and the vibrations go along the string, and you can listen to it at the other end. But when this relationship happens, that string's cut. I can yell anything I want in that can.
It's an echo
It's nothing gonna
at
happen.
best. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciated watching you kind of stomp around,
Yeah,
write down what you
yeah.
wanted and be like, I'm gonna send it.
I'm gonna send this.
And then I was like,
Oh,
"Are you sure?" And that's all I said. "Are you sure?" And I watched you stomp differently. Be
yeah.
like, "Oh, I really want to, but
Uh,
it won't actually get me more peace in my life."
So that was the moment was when it's like, well, what do I actually want now? Because one of the things I was caught by was my past self and the things that that guy wanted
Yeah.
out of a relationship that didn't have it. So it wasn't going to work back then either. Um, but that's not what this guy wants now from right here.
Yeah.
So pulling myself back to the present and saying, well, what are my actual goals? Oh,
Yeah.
this doesn't meet them. Great.
Right. So, who are you acting from?
Hmm.
Like, which version of yourself are you speaking from?
Boy, we could have a whole other episode on that.
Okay, we'll dig into it. For now, let's leave this. I know this is a long episode, and I appreciate that. I just wanted to say that we are not the
Oh
experts
God.
in conscious uncoupling,
Nope.
but we wanted to have this conversation because we know that this comes up for so many
Yeah.
people, and hearing the inside of the experience is one of the most healing things that I have witnessed. So I encourage everyone to read, to listen, and to get really deeply in touch with your own needs, wants, bottom lines, and boundaries as you go through a process of deciding, what are we doing?
What are
What
we
am
doing?
I doing in this relationship?
I don't,
And I'd love to hear people's responses. Join us for our monthly Ask Me Anything. We have a Playing with Fire, Ask Me Anything conversation. Come, where I'm answering questions, but also we're just having a discussion. It's a time to share how the episodes are pinging off of your life and what questions they're bringing up
we
for
would
you.
love to hear it.
So you can go to joliehamilton.com/AMA. Find that. There's no one right way to design your relationship. And lots of people, actually about 25%, according to a recent national survey, are interested in some type of open relationship. But how do you know if you are ready to open up happily? Not everyone is, and that's no problem. I've got a 60-second quiz that will give you the answer. And even better, you'll walk away with your next step, whether you're good to go or not so much when it comes to opening up. And this is no BuzzFeed nonsense. I personally designed this quiz from my years of academic research. Go to joliequiz.com. That's JOLIQUIZ.com and find out if you're ready to open up happily and what to do if you are or if you're not.